कुंज बिहारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी जन वल्लभा गिरिवरधारी कुंज राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी जय गोपी जन वल्लभा गिरिवरधारी जय गोपी जन वल्लभा गिरिवरधारी She's saying everything is perfect. Chodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Natira Vanachari Natira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Bhagavatam, Canto 11, Chapter 11, Texts 1 to 7 verses for over a week, 7 days worth of classes. Because I think undergraduate study after your family, his capacity is advisory, custody, which is father, and father, brothers. The nature of highly rushed, highly scripture, and so the discussions are going very deep. Rather than going all the way back to earlier parts of the 11th canto, I'll go back. In the 11th canto, chapters 2 or 3, this is the discussion from the Navya letters, the 9 sons of Rishabdev, who became Mahabharata Vaishnavas. There's discussions between them, Navya letters, and Kimini. And they're highly philosophical. Kimini asks important questions, and the 9 letters give answers one after the next. When that chapter closes, the next chapter finds us in Dwarka. Chapters 3 and 4 were in Dwarka, with Narada Muni visiting the home of Vasudeva. Vasudeva said, "I was so preoccupied with Krishna as my son, I didn't take the time to inquire to me about transcendental knowledge." So it has questions, Narada has many answers, and the emphasis, a lot of the emphasis in this beginning so far, beginning of the 11th canto, was knowledge and detachment. Knowledge, Jnana, Vairagya. And then chapter 6 begins, which shows where Krishna, well, after the visit of Narada to Vasudeva, Vasudeva becomes inspired to have him at his home. So many Brahmanas come, big yajna, big festivities, distribution of charity to the Brahmanas go to I can do what you need to do. You want me to put my computer in front of you?
Yeah. Could you hold this one? Just want to make sure that
you're wired up over there.
okay, good. Okay. Mistake.
May I begin? or resume or whatever. Should I start all over again? Please tell me what to do. Just wait. For 7 or 8 classes, I've been discussing Uddhava Gita, and I've gotten as far as chapter 11, verses 29 through 32. And to understand what's the importance of what's here, it's, I think, significant to get a little context. Very strong emphasis leading up to these verses is the theme of knowledge and detachment, Jnana Vairagya. And it starts as early as 11th canto, chapters 2 and 3, where the Navayogendras are visiting a yagya being performed by Maharaj Nimi. Nimi stops his yagya, presents many questions, 2 chapters worth of questions and answers. The theme, in simple terms, knowledge of detachment. Chapters 4 and 5, same theme, context is different. The context is Narada is in Dwarka visiting the home of Vasudeva. Vasudeva takes the opportunity of Narada's visit to ask about various items of transcendental knowledge, and Narada gives transcendental knowledge to Vasudeva. Again, knowledge of detachment. And chapter 6 opens with Vasudeva deciding, being very inspired by Narada's association, to perform a yagya. And the yagya is attended by many, many brahmanas from all over. And after the yagya, he profusely gives charity and so forth. And the brahmanas retire from his home. They go to a place not far from Dwarka. And still in chapter 6, the young boys in Dwarka go there and make an offense. They make an offense to the brahmanas by Samba, one of Krishna's sons, dressing up like a pregnant lady wearing a sari. The other boys say she's covering her head because she's very shy, but she wants to know whether the child that she has is going to be a boy or a girl. And the brahmanas know that they're being made fun of or insulted. So they respond to the insult by saying, this child will bring the destruction of the entire Yadu dynasty. And so still in chapter 6, the boys go tell Ugrasena. Ugrasena consults his ministers. The ministers advise, grind that lump of iron which was underneath the sari of Samba into powder, throw it in the sea. It's duly done. The powder is thrown into the sea. There's one piece that doesn't grind. They throw that in the ocean. A fish swallows that lump of iron. A fisherman catches the fish, sells it to a hunter. The hunter opens the fish, finds a lump of iron, decides to make an arrowhead with that iron. He uses that iron to shoot the heel of Krishna. But that's it, going further ahead. So the curse of the Brahmanas is now known throughout the whole of Dwarka. And Krishna is alone. The demigods come to Krishna and offer wonderful prayers. There are many places in the 10th canto where the demigods are offering prayers. This is one. And after their prayers, they say, you fulfilled your promise to come and annihilate the demoniac kings. The earth is now free from that burden. So if you so desire, you can return to the spiritual world. The sages stat for Krishna to return. The chapter ends with Krishna still alone, contemplating the stage is set for the Yadu dynasty to return to the spiritual world. One thing that's remaining, I want to give instructions to Uddhava so that he can go to Narayan Rishi and the Badrika Ashram and the followers and give my association. And so, lo and behold, Uddhava shows up, falls at Krishna's feet, and end of chapter 6, Uddhava says, take me with you. And he also says, so that I can understand you with unobstructed clarity, there's an obstacle. The obstacle is my attachment to the temporary. So please give me the means by which I can become free from attachment. The door is now open. Chapters 7, 8, and 9 is knowledge and detachment again. I mean, it's so strong and so much repeated, the reader would naturally say, all right, I get it. Knowledge of detachment, knowledge of detachment. But the purpose of knowledge and detachment, the purpose of the Vedas, filled with knowledge, is to know Krishna. The purpose of knowledge and detachment is to know Krishna unobstructed, which was Uddhava's question. So there's many details in those 3 chapters. And chapter 10 is Krishna then elaborating essentially how to get there, how to get to that position of knowledge and detachment. And what are some things not to do, what are some things to do. Some detours is going to the heavenly planets and so forth and so on. Chapter 10 ends with Uddhava asking, I have a question. The question is, I've heard that a Nitya Bada can become Nitya Siddha, so how is this? Because Nitya means Nitya. So how can you Nitya anything become Nitya something else? And that opens chapter 11, which is our chapter now. So chapter 11, keeping it simple, Krishna says, Uddhava, your question itself is misleading. Because the soul is pure, just like I'm pure. There's no question of me becoming liberated, nor the soul becoming liberated. The soul is pure. And these terms, Baddha and Siddha, they're designations. We know the word designation in our ISKCON vernacular is upadhi. The superimposition of something on something else, and thinking that the superimposition is the something. I'm the body or the mind. the coverings of the soul. Those are upadhis. He goes on to explain, then it gets like really intricate. These two, knowledge and ignorance, are shaktis of Maya. Maya Shakti has divisions. Vidya and Avidya Shakti are subdivisions of Maya Shakti. When living entity is under the influence of Avidya, Badha. When living entity is under influence of Vidya, so Advidya and Vidya, under the influence of Vidya, then liberated, Mukta. But those are designations. Influenced by Maya Shakti. Then he goes over and starts talking about the soul being pure. And in its pure condition, what does a pure soul do? The pure soul connects with the Supreme Soul. So now we're getting into the fruit of knowledge and detachment is to connect with the Supreme Soul. Not just detachment from the temporary, but attachment to the Supreme Soul. So in the pure state, the soul does that. The soul has a spiritual mind, and the spiritual mind is absorbed in the Supreme Soul. And then he recommends living in this world. So here comes the Bhagavad Gita chapter 3 topic. Living in the world, knowing that you're a pure soul, but still doing things. So then it starts to get into subtle distinctions in the nomenclature of the yoga process. So here's some subtle distinction in the nomenclature of the yoga process. There's Gyan Yoga, there's Gyan Mishra Bhakti, and there's Shuddha Bhakti. And there's discussion weaves back and forth where Krishna is describing what is Shuddha Bhakti and what is, I'm not there yet, that's all of us. We're not there yet at the Shuddha Bhakti stage. So those that are not at the Shuddha Bhakti stage, where the mind is not always in all circumstances fixed upon Krishna and engaging the senses in service to Krishna, if one is not at the Shuddha Bhakti stage, then Krishna recommends continuing to do one's work, but offering the results of one's work to Krishna, Karma Yoga, or more specifically, Nishkam Karma Yoga. And second, hear about me. If you can think back on Canto 2, chapters 1, 2, and 3, same theme, hearing about Krishna, along with how the mind becomes fixed. First, the universal form, then the Paramatma feature, and then the Bhagavan feature. But the mind goes to Krishna, but it's strengthened by a mind that has become freed from the pollution of fruitive intention. So the purpose of Karma Yoga or Nishkam Karma Yoga is to purify the mind, so that the mind can fix upon Krishna without being distracted by fruitive intention while living in the world. Then Krishna goes into describing, in the mature stage of that, the karma yoga, the varnashram dharma, or the prescribed duties and detachment, offering the result of prescribed duties unto Vishnu, or him, Krishna, is no longer required. So it's not exactly karma sannyas, as the Mayavadis like karma sannyas, but it's a Vaishnava position where one is becoming purified by following vidhis, the regulations of work in this world, your duty, and offering the results of your duty to Krishna, and hearing about him, which is kind of what we do. Then to the stage where one is no longer obliged to perform prescribed duties. One does, the example that's given is Ekadasi, today's Ekadasi. So there's everyday or nitya karma or nitya dharma duties that we do always, like take bath and chant a mantra and so forth. And then there's occasional, like Ekadasi or Janmashtami or coming up Radhastami, and there's occasional things. And then there's nityas things. So they're doing those duties for the sake of purification. That's mode of goodness. And when one is in transcendence, one is no longer obliged to do even for goodness, for purification's sake, because going back to the philosophy that Krishna spoke at the beginning of chapter 11, the soul is pure. So when the soul is directly engaged in service to Krishna, those obligations are no longer there. Now we're way up there now. We're in this stage of spontaneous devotional service where regulations are no longer binding. One still does, like Krishna says to Arjuna in Bhagavad Gita, even when you're liberated, you do, because it sets example like King Janaka and others. They're perfected souls, but they do for setting example. And devotees desire. So now, all of that is a warm-up for 29 through 32, keeping it simple because of our time constraints. 29 through 31 has a list of 28 qualities of a devotee. And there are many places we will find where there's descriptions of the qualities of a devotee. A classic one is in Chaitanya Charitamrita. Krishnadas Kaviraj gives a list of 26. Here it's a list of 28, rather than identifying where are all the other places. There's many other places. And the lists aren't always 28 or 26. They can be fewer numbers, and that's okay. It's different models of describing the characteristics of a devotee, because that was the question. And then the text 32, according to our acharyas, largely the commentary says, this is the standard of unalloyed devotion. So devotees and then unalloyed devotees, text 32. And we're going to be this morning reading translations of text 32. But in that translation that we're going to read, it speaks of their mind has become so purified that they no longer require to perform their regulated duties, either nitya, dharma, or naimittika. Naimittika means occasional, like observing Ekadasi. Doesn't mean they don't follow Ekadasi, they do whatever they want, but they're not bound, duty bound. They do anyways. So now, the commentaries directly on these verses are like 8-10 pages. And then there's commentary on other texts that make reference to these verses because of their importance. There's Bhaktivinoda Thakur in his Jaiva Dharma. Bhaktivinoda Thakur is in his Amnaya Sutra, making the same points and making reference to these verses because they're foundational importance. What is the quality of a devotee and what's the standard unalloyed devotion? Now, some commentaries also speak of this as intermediate, and you'll see why. So tomorrow I'm going to begin with text 33, but you're familiar with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's discussion with Ramananda Roy, and that's what we're going to be reading this morning. Something from a text that Prabhupada, it's a transcription of his lectures, a book that's called In Search of the Ultimate Goal of Life, No Clear Idea. That's the title of the book. And the reference is Lord Chaitanya's talks with Ramananda Roy, where Lord Chaitanya asked Ramananda Roy, what's the goal of life and the means to achieve it? That's the question. And then their talk is Ramananda Roy's response, and Lord Chaitanya says, go further, go further. So in that dialogue between the two, what Krishna is saying, the Uddhava Gita chapter 11 is the topic, same topic. So Lord Chaitanya's teachings and the Bhagavatam's teachings are the same. I'm just going to read. This is now, the starting point is offering the results of work to Krishna. Performance of Varnashram, Varnashram, Charavata, Vishvaksena Kataya. So one of the verses recommended by Ramananda Roy is the performance of Varnashram duties and rendering the results to Krishna. Same as what Krishna spoke. The grossly materialistic people
cannot understand how it is possible to give away the result of one's own work. It is impossible for grossly materialistic people to part with their earnings that are made by their personal effort. Such gross materialists can simply get information from the suggestion that they have to give away the result of their personal labor to the personality of Godhead. But because they do not have a clear idea of the personality of Godhead or the process of giving the result of their earnings to the personality of Godhead, it's very difficult for them to practice this conception. True. Paragraph. When Lord Chaitanya rejected Ramananda Roy's second suggestion of directly offering the fruits of one's actions to God rather than indirectly through the Varnashram system, Ramananda then made a third suggestion. He proposed that ordinary people who are fully engaged in the act of earning and enjoying improve their life by giving up the process of continuing to live in the material world while offering the fruits of their labor to God. On the basis of this improved idea, Ramananda Roy quoted a sloka from Srimad Bhagavatam 11:11:32. Hey, that's this morning's verse. In this sloka, the personality Godhead says, quote, occupational duties are described in religious scriptures. If one analyzes them, one can fully understand their qualities and faults and then give them up completely to render service unto me. Such a person is accepted as a saint of the highest order. Paragraph. This conception is based on the fact that ultimately the acceptance of devotional service of Godhead is the highest aim of religious perfection. By performing religious duties, if we can reach pure devotion, we may be considered first-class sadhus or saints. That was a quick summary. And here's an expanded one, saying this exchange between Lord Chaitanya and Ramananda Roy from Teachings of Lord Chaitanya, chapter 28. Lord Chaitanya rejected the statement cited by Ramananda Roy from Vishnu Purana because the Lord wished to reject a class of philosophers known as Mimamsakas. The followers of Karma Mimamsa philosophy teach that God is subject to one's work. Their conclusion is that if one works nicely, God is bound to give good results. Thus, from the statement of Vishnu Purana cited by Ramananda Roy, one might conclude that Vishnu, the Supreme Lord, has no independence, but is bound to award a certain kind of result to the worker. Such a dependent God becomes subject to the worshiper, who accepts the Supreme Lord as both impersonal and personal as he wishes. Actually, the Karma Mimamsa philosophy stresses the impersonal feature of the Supreme Absolute Truth. Because Lord Chaitanya did not like such impersonalism, he rejected it. Tell me if you know something beyond this conception of the Supreme Absolute Truth, Lord Chaitanya said. Ramananda Roy understood the purpose of Lord Chaitanya, and after stating that it is better to give Krishna the results of fruitive activities, he quoted a verse from Bhagavad Gita 9:27. Oh, son of Kunti, whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you sacrifice, whatever you give away, whatever austerity you undergo to achieve some goal, everything should be dedicated to my service. There's a similar passage in Srimad Bhagavatam 11:2-36. Again, knowledge and detachment. Navyogendras to King Nimi, which states that one should submit everything, all the results of the fruitive activities one performs with body, speech, mind, senses, intelligence, soul, and modes of nature to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Narayana. Lord Chaitanya, however, also rejected this second statement, saying, if you know something higher, state it. Offering everything to the Supreme Personality of Godhead as enjoined by the Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam is better than impersonally making the Supreme Lord subject to our work. But it is still short of surrendering to the Supreme Lord. A worker's identification with material existence cannot be changed without proper guidance. Such fruitive activity will continue one's material existence. A worker is simply instructed here to offer the results of his work to the Supreme Lord, but there's no information given to enable one to get out of material entanglement. Therefore, Lord Chaitanya rejected this proposal. After having his suggestions rejected twice, Ramananda Roy proposed that one should forsake his occupational activities altogether and by such detachment rise to the transcendental plane. In other words, he recommended complete renunciation of worldly life. To support this proposal, he cited evidence from 11.11.32. But there's a reason why this gets so much commentary. It's so fundamental to understanding the stages of approaching pure devotion to Krishna. So these other statements, they're right, they're not wrong. But there can be, and there sometimes are misconceptions of them. So he gives the translation for the verse. Ramananda also quoted Lord Krishna's similar statement in Bhagavad Gita 1866. Just see, it's like the conclusion of Bhagavad Gita is right here in Uddhava Gita. Give up all kinds of religiousness and just surrender unto me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. I shall protect you from all sinful reactions, and you will have nothing to be aggrieved over. However, Lord Chaitanya also rejected this third proposal from Ramananda Roy, for he wanted to demonstrate that renunciation in itself is not sufficient. There must be positive engagement. Without positive engagement, the highest perfectional stage cannot be attained. Generally, there are two kinds of philosophers in the renounced order of life. The goal of one is nirvana, and the goal of the other is impersonal Brahman effulgence. Such philosophers cannot imagine that they can reach beyond nirvana and the Brahman effulgence to the Vaikuntha planets of the spiritual sky. Because in simple renunciation, there's no conception of spiritual planets and spiritual activities. Lord Chaitanya rejected this third proposal. Ramananda Roy then cited more evidence from the Bhagavad Gita, 1854. Quote, when by cultivation of knowledge a person realizes himself to be non-different from the Supreme Absolute Truth, he becomes joyful and is freed from all kinds of lamentation and material desires. At that time, he perfects his Brahman realization by seeing everyone on the same spiritual level. Such Brahman realization can elevate one to the transcendental stage of devotional service. Ramananda Roy first suggested devotional service with renunciation of the fruits of one's work, but here he suggests that devotional service with full knowledge and spiritual realization is superior. However, Lord Chaitanya also rejected this proposal because simply by renouncing material results in Brahman realization, one does not realize the spiritual world and spiritual activities. Although there is no material contamination when one attains the stage of Brahman realization, in that stage one is still not perfectly pure because there's no positive engagement in spiritual activity. Because it is still on the mental plane, it is external. The pure living entity is not liberated until and unless he is completely engaged in spiritual activity. So it goes on because there's talks between Raman and Roy. And Lord Chaitanya don't end there. Many pages. So just backing up a little review. As in that talk with Ramananda Roy, this 11.11.32 is not conclusive. Therefore, some of the acharyas say it's in this intermediate range, although others speak of it as pure devotion. Anyavilashita shunyam jnana karma janavratam. But then pleasing Krishna is the purpose. But it's not explicitly stated, and therefore he says, go further. But going backwards now a little bit, just to cover this ground. When the statement is there, abandon all varieties of dharma. For example, it doesn't mean, when Krishna Janmashtami comes, you just, business as usual. Or when Ekadasi comes, business as usual. It doesn't mean you neglect those occasional and daily, because I'm now in the spiritual platform. I don't need to follow anything. If I'm not mistaken, somewhere here in Texas, there's a person that imitated Prabhupada and formed a temple where they teach Raga Yoga Bhakti. You know the place? Okay, there is such a place. So one of our Trinidadian devotees went there once, kind of innocently, and sat and heard the Swamini give her talk about Raga Yoga Bhakti. And at the end, he raised his hand and said, is it important that you follow the principles of not eating meat? Because the talk was, you don't need to follow regulations. So, it was his purpose was to trip her up, and it worked because she got flustered. So it doesn't mean we don't follow regular principles. We don't follow standards. We follow standards. The person's on the topmost platform. They follow standards. But they're not obliged to follow standards. And if it appears that they don't follow those standards, there's no transgression. There's no sin incurred. I mean, the commentary that I've been reading for the past number of days says all of that. Very profound. Very, so we follow things, but we don't follow it. We're following because our mind is not pure, and therefore will help our minds become pure. Yet there's a higher purpose than just purification, because that's a mode of goodness principle. And we need to become elevated to the mode of goodness so that we can become more elevated to transcendence, where there's no modes anymore. So we follow and we offer everything to Krishna. But the mood, so reading this section, to understand what it's saying so that one can say something more and say something more and say something more. What's that something more than what's being said? Everything is meant for Krishna's service. That's the definition that we have from Rupa Goswami. So what's more than the definition of Rupa Goswami? Sounds like this, that's it. Prior to that stage that's described in text 32. So again, text 32 is saying, one may come to the stage where the mind has become pure. And when the mind has become pure, then there's no longer a requirement to do those same activities that make the mind pure, because the mind is pure. And such a person is no longer obliged to follow their prescribed duties. Now there's a similar discussion, not identical, but similar discussion in chapter 6 Bhagavad Gita. Some of you like to study Prabhupada's books. So in chapter 6 of Bhagavad Gita is the Ashtanga yoga system, or Dhyan yoga. So there's two stages identified, where work is said to be the means, the cessation of work is said to be the means. And the cessation of work is being described in this verse, that, the text 32. And the work is perform your duties and offer the results. And then you're no longer obliged to perform your duties or offer the results. Doesn't mean don't do duties or you don't have activities. You sit and meditate. If you're a Dhyan yogi or Ashtanga yogi, you literally live in the Himalayas, or you literally do what they do. You're not involved in worldly affairs. You're an absolute renunciate, and all you do is dhyan. Now, even those that do dhyan, they need to do something to maintain their bodies. And so if the mind is pure, then they're maintaining their bodies just so they can do their dhyan and not for any other reason. That's when the mind is pure. And then something else takes over to maintain the body besides just sleeping and eating and taking bath and doing the regular things that one does. So as it's there in the dhyan process, it's there in the bhakti process. So it's not that those that are bhaktas, I mean, in the Mahabharata, there's this description that when forgetting his name. Other than Bhishma, who are the two sons of Santanu with Satyavati?
Vichitravirya and Chitranga.
Yeah, Vichitravirya. So when Vichitravirya, thank you. When Vichitravirya had died, Satyavati was in anxiety because Vichitravirya had wives, but there were no sons yet. So there has to be continuation of the dynasty. So she requested grandfather, her son, or Santanu's son, Bhishma, to produce sons with the queens. And he declined, saying, I've taken a vow, don't ask me to do it, I'm not gonna do. But I do have a suggestion. There's another son of yours. That's Vyas. So call Vyas. And he already said, if you just need me, just call me. So she said, it's a great idea. And she called Vyas and he came. But Vyas, in that circumstance, was engaged in severe austerity. And during his severe austerity, he was not bathed and he was just doing austerity and lean and thin. So, he said, can you wait? So I'm done with my austerity. He said, no, who knows what's going to happen? There may something happen to Richard Tiberius, something may happen to these queens, and please do this service. He said, it's not going to have a good result. So, Vyasadeva is not a Tyagi or a Ashtanga yogi. He's a personality of Godhead, and he's engaged in pure devotion. But even such persons, they may also engage in austerities. As we know, there's austerities performed by Vaishnavas in previous ages in particular. Like, we get so many examples. Kapila Dev, or Kardama Muni, and the austerities that he underwent. Anyway, there's many examples of Vaishnavas, not for the purpose of liberation, but for the purpose of purification and offering service to the personality of Godhead. So back to this, whether it's control of the senses or knowledge and detachment, that kind of benefit, knowledge and detachment, or austerity and detachment, the real fruit of all of that is making the connection with Krishna unobstructed, or the purification of the mind and senses. And there's stages of all of that. Bhaktivinoda Thakur outlines it elaborately in Jaiva Dharma. Elaborately. And the same as this conversation here. So it behooves us, because we're not at the stage of pure devotion, unalloyed devotion, it behooves us to understand what these stages are. It also behooves us to understand what the goal is. Like, why are we doing what we're doing? Because if we don't understand why we're doing what we're doing, then it's niyamagraha. We're following without really understanding the purpose. And what happens if you follow without understanding the purpose? It becomes mechanical. And then devotees start complaining, or not complaining, but recognizing my devotional service has become mechanical. My chanting has become mechanical. My deity worship has become, my offering of arati has become mechanical. And if you think about it, you'll probably recognize, yeah, for me too. So what's the remedy? Understand what our stage is and understand the purpose to what that stage is, and going further and going further. This discussion with Ramananda Roy, or the discussion that's going on right now in the Uddhava Gita section, there's stages of devotion, and sufficient knowledge is needed, just like we read Prabhupada's little description. People should offer the results to the personality of God, but who is he that you're making the offering onto? Supposing that's vague and not clear, then what are you doing? So you can have an idea of God. Well, I'm making offerings to God. To who's God? The more clear the understanding of the process and the object of the process, takes away the mechanical or the ritualistic. And when the mechanical and ritualistic is in place, what's going to happen in course of time is everything becomes deteriorated. And it happens. It happens not only in Vaishnavism, Gaudiya, in Vaishnavism in general. Without going into it too much, Prabhupada would speak often about Christianity. And on the one hand, the teaching is the same as bhakti. And on the other hand, when the ritual, notional sense of God and praying to God becomes prominent, then essentials like thou shalt not kill just get neglected. And then there's this mindless, and it just becomes the standard. Recently heard Prabhupada describing one of the events that started Christianity was Christ was seeing those animal slaughter going on in the temple. And then there was, the Jewish faith, and they were slaughtering animals in a temple, and this is disgusting. So he went in a different direction. And so with that, rather than going too far with that, the principle is so that our personal devotional service doesn't become mechanical, chanting and worshiping and praying and thising and thating. There's a higher purpose. And hearing about same as in this Uddhava Gita section, hearing about Krishna regularly in the company of elevated souls, sadhus, this is very important. It's very important. It's regulative for us, but it's very important so that the purification of the mind can take place, and the working in the world in a spirit of detachment and offering the results to Krishna is very important to go to higher stages. So then we're hearing the higher stages, you're no longer obliged. Anyway, so in Uddhava Gita, Krishna is going to take that further. If you want, you can go back and read this really clear presentation and teachings of Lord Chaitanya, where the talk with Ramananda Roy has gone into where Lord Chaitanya is saying, that's very nice, but go further. Or it's external. What's external about that? What's beyond? What's missing? What's the piece that's missing? It's an important discussion for us. See if there's some comments or questions.
No questions so far, but I can ask you a question. So the surrender is a very important quality in the sadhana bhakti stage. But we also see the pure devotees also surrender to the Lord, because how does surrender manifest in prema stage? Because surrender has the aspect of recognizing Krishna as the Supreme Lord. But in the prema bhakti stage, the pure love of God is fully manifest. But how does surrender? How do pure devotees surrender?
How does a pure devotee surrender?
Yeah. Because in the sadhana stage, we have to recognize
It's spontaneous. I'm not sure what you're asking, but there's the effort, and then there's no effort.
For example, in sadhana stage, there has to be some aishwarya to surrender to the Lord, because you see Lord as the Supreme Lord. Krishna, the Supreme Lord, is all powerful, is all pervasive. So that knowledge is there in the sadhana stage. But in the perfected stages, talk about the prema stage. How does the surrender manifest without
Spontaneous. And there's different realms where that mood of spontaneous service takes place. And for example, Hanuman. he knows that Ramachandra, his love is pure. He's not in a regulative stage, not doing because. He knows who he is, but it's not just he knows who he is. He's great and he's opulent, he's this and that. His happiness is in serving Ram. And then that's Ayodhya, an emblem of service. And then you go further and further. They're let's say that's in Dwarka or just outside Dwarka. Sudama Brahman. He wasn't austere because it was a regulative thing. He liked austerity. And he went to see Krishna not because his wife was nagging him, but that he was affectionate to his wife, whose renunciation was equal to his, but she was concerned about her husband's welfare. And so he went anyways because he was looking forward to being with Krishna. And when he was with Krishna, it was ecstatic. Anyway, what's the inspiration is not because he's the Supreme Lord, it's just because of that quality of their love. That's the inspiration. Or, anyone. You have something?
Sure.
Maharaj, you mentioned about once we start doing mechanical services.
Once we start what?
Mechanical.
Mechanical.
Yes. Services. We keep doing that very often, and it looks as if it is, ritualistic, mechanical process.
We're very familiar.
So you mentioned that we should gain more knowledge. That is the.
But that's not just that's the emphasis in the initial 4.5 chapters of Bhagavad Gita. That's not all there is to come out of it, but that's a starting point. But it's not knowledge for knowledge's sake. That's made very clear. There's knowledge of what the goal is and detachment from what's not the goal. And the allure that keeps us bound is the hankering to the expectation of finding happiness in material objects or the material manifestations, finding happiness over there. So detachment from that kind of knowledge and detachment, but also greater clarity about what the goal is or what God is and in different features. And the more the personal feature, the more the incentive for offering things to Krishna. That's the knowledge part, but then there's other things and there's other things besides just knowledge as impetus to get beyond mechanical service. There's the heart platform and the mind platform.
And the mind keeps confusing us more and more often.
And the mind what?
Mind keeps confusing us more and more often.
Well, it's very familiar territory for a conditioned soul. We've been at it for a long time.
There's a question on you. When we say offering results to Supreme Lord, how can we understand it in practical terms? How do we identify if we are offering our results or not?
Most people have money. So how do you use it? How do you gather it, acquire it, and how do you use it? So, we're sitting in somebody's home and there's a table with chairs and there's a kitchen and there's a this and there's a that. So how does one see those things? And to furnish the home or for your computer or microphone. What's the consciousness? How does one see objects that are acquired through the fruits of one's work? And how do we engage with those objects? As though it's you get your paycheck. Now you're going to spend it. So there are things that you have to do by obligation, by law. You have to pay your mortgage or your apartment rent or whatever it is. And what's the consciousness behind it? So those fruits of your work. So how are you seeing what you're doing as you're spending your paycheck or earning your paycheck or developing the skill to enhance your career further? How are you seeing all of that? Is it that the fruit is meant for the pleasure of Krishna or otherwise? And the answer to that question is the answer to your question, or the person who's asking. Those are practical. Over here, anything? Okay. It's a long cable, just all tied in. But
The Bhagavatam was saying, like sometimes when we are chanting, if any other word comes, then suppose if I have a meeting or anything, then I am listening to it, like mechanically I am praising it. How do I tell my mind that other things are not going on, the chanting is moving?
well, when you're doing your occupational work, it's important to do it nicely because it's for Krishna. But when you're chanting, that's what's most important, is the focus upon the sound of Krishna's name. So your question specifically, your question is how to. And my standard answer for how-to questions is sadhusanga. But I just recently, just last couple of days, heard a really simple GBC SPT interview with our chairman of the GBC, Bhakti Chaitanya Swami, on 3 laws of japa. And then some tips, he calls it. Really simple. And he's conducting classes. He's the chairman of the GBC, and every day for months, twice a day, at 5:30 in the morning, Durban, South Africa time, for an hour and a half, and in the afternoon for 1 hour, 4:30. As busy as he is, he considers it so important that he's conducting classes every day, twice a day, on weekdays for these topics. So it's really easy to find it. gbcspt.com or GBC Strategic Planning, Bhakti Chaitanya Swami, 4 laws, and you'll get the link. It's in the Facebook link. And that the 3 laws are: be attentive. 2, be attentive. 3, somehow be attentive. And then some tips are how to help you be attentive. You know, how you say the mantra, and you'll listen. But the how-to is because when there's sadhu sangha, you receive from sadhus the sadhu message, and it goes in. That's sadhu sangha, and then you do. It's nothing new. Be attentive, and that can be expanded upon philosophically in writings and teachings and so on. But the instruction is very simple. You do because that's what you're to do. And even when the mind is distracted, you bring it back to that's what you're to do. It's very simple. Is recording or the interview. I encourage everyone to read or to hear. It's short, 40 minutes, which includes the preamble of introduction and so forth. Very crisp, very much to the point. It's how we do is by the effort to do so. And the effort to do so is guided by powerful instructions from powerful sadhus. And we follow because we heard. And what happens after time is the mind starts to drift again. So go back and hear again. But the principle doesn't change. And so by abhyasa yoga yogtena cetasa nanyagamino, by constant practice, one can come to the stage, and it's explained there. You practice properly, it just becomes second nature. Instead of distraction being second nature, being attentive becomes second nature, but you have to practice. Okay.
3 questions from the same person. Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj, I have 3 questions. If we perform services for purification, is it not motivated devotional service?
Yes. It's a good motivation. It's a mode of goodness motivation. It's recommended in scripture.
Question number 2. I am also not able to understand that one is no longer obliged to. If service is done in the mode of obligation, then how one will be at the stage of love?
You do out of love, not because of obligation. It's similar to your question. Next.
What is the difference between Nishkam Karma Yoga and Karma Sannyas? Are they comparable? Which is better?
What's better is whatever your stage of bhakti is. If you're qualified, you can do karma sannyas. Not as a Mayavadi, but as a pure Vaishnava. I mean, let's take Rishabdev. When he turned the kingdom over to his son, he became an avadhuta. There was lots of things he didn't do, but there was no bondage for him not doing those things. So what's best is whatever your position in bhakti is. That's described in Uddhava Gita also. Very, very clear. What's right and wrong is according to your position. That which is appropriate for your position, that's what's right. And wrong is to not do that and to do something else. But your position may change and then something else is right. So there's different teachings in the scriptures for persons in different positions. And one has to have, the big picture of where I am and what all the moving parts of the big picture are, what's appropriate for me. So the distinction between Nishkam Karma Yoga and Karma Sannyas, you don't perform those duties. And Nishkam Karma Yoga is you do perform those duties, but you give the result.
That's all the comment. Thank you so much, Guru Maharaj.
Is it? Prabhupada ki jai.
Guru Maharaj ki jai.